All right, so far in our digital coloring, we just finished full spectrum. So we've gotten right to here. We've gone through the sketch, the vector line art, the flat local color, the duotone hard edge color, the soft edge duotone color, and now the full spectrum color. But notice how from here back, everything has an outline around it. Everything's underneath the outline. The next special effect is to work on top of the outline. So if you think of this as the digital coloring sandwich with black bread on top, that's the black line art. That should stay a vector, right? And then it has the white bread on the bottom. And then everything inside is extra. So the offset, the flat color, the duotone, on and on and on. And then the last thing we did was the full spectrum. And then I did a duplicate of the full spectrum and then erased it out in places, right? So really this is like the full spectrum, and then this is the full spectrum I actually wanted to use. And you can see how that changed my colors slightly in really all areas by kind of mixing color into it. And yet all those decisions are still there. All those color decisions, all the duotone edges, all the softening, it's all still there. Now, what can I do next? I like to do it on gray because gray kind of shows you the extremes. I have everything locked, even the layers I'm deciding not to use. So full spectrum I'm going to make into the violet color. So I have almost a full rainbow here. And at any time I can go to one of these layers, unlock it, and then play with its opacity and decide on how much I want it or how little I want it. I'm going to put it right at 2/3 right now, at 66. Yeah, because I think that's helpful, but it doesn't overdo it. Yeah, so lock that. Now we get to what's called color holds on top of the black line art. So everything is locked. I go to my black line art. Now this is going to be stuff on top of that. So the most basic color hold is just make a new layer. And then I'm just going to draw something. Let's see. What would be shiny? Maybe the light on the cop car, right? So I'm going to draw a little star. And I'm going to fill that. Edit fill with white. And now I have that white star on top of my cop car, right? That is what's called a color hold because the printer has to hold the color from the black to let the paper show through for that. And that's a lot more cost effective than printing an opaque ink on top of the black. So that's why it has that term color hold, because the ink for the base layer is held for that. Black is always the base layer. It's always the cheapest ink. It's also always the most effective. Now, what if I want to make more of that color hold? Well, I can do different things with it. I can transform it, make it bigger. Just like our compositing skills, right? I can kind of move that star to where I think it's helpful. Then I can play with layer styles. I better plug in. 2%. Going fast. All right. And I can give it an outer glow, but maybe not of white, maybe of a yellow, or kind of a creamy off-white. And then I can play with that, and you see how that's going to affect the line art around it. And I still have that dissolve filter on, so it's doing it in that kind of noisy way, but I can take that down, make it softer edged, like that. And I can play with its size. But now it's affecting, and it makes all that light look brighter. And then, of course, I can use transform, and I can shrink it if I think it's too much. And I can play with opacity. But the important thing is this is on top of the line art. So I'm going to keep that at fully opaque. And it kind of makes it look like a sharp nail that's going to get stepped on. I could duplicate that, and I can move that color, what's called a color hold, up. This is a duplicate. Woo. And use it on some of this stuff too. Duplicate it again, Command J. What's a good spot? Maybe right here. Or maybe on the tail again. And you see how it just gives it a little pop, especially if I have a darker background, right? If I turn off my color references, you can see how those read a little bit differently than the white offset reads. Right? Now they're glowing. I do another duplicate. This is way overdoing it, right? But just to make my point, you can have as many of these as you want. Take that duplicate, and I'm going to make the eye gleaming to make it look reflective. Right? Okay, so what's another way you can use a color hold? Well, what if you don't want black for your line art? You can duplicate your line art, your black bread layer, and then rasterize it. Sometimes you don't even need to rasterize it, but I think it's always a good idea so you don't get confused about what your black layer is. And then I'm going to move it underneath my stars, right? But I'm going to mark this, let's see, gray. No, I already had gray. I'm going to mark it green for an olive, like an olive that you stick with a toothpick into the top of your sandwich, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use layer styles again, but this time it's for your black line art. And I could do something as crazy as use my gradient overlay to fill in all my black line art. And it will use the same full spectrum gradient overlay that I used last time, so it actually kind of matches with the full spectrum color. But I can also change that. Maybe I reverse it. Maybe I pick a different gradient. So I'm going to use something really strong, like the oranges, and I'm going to go like this. And I'm going to make it 100%. Boom. So why might that be helpful? Well, let me see. Let me play with reflecting it. Yeah, let me play with the scale of it. Maybe like so. Now, is this helpful? It isn't helpful in most of my image, but it is helpful in part of my image, which is the kind of explosion around his head. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy those lines, or that section, because it's just the line art that this color hold is affecting. I have now replaced all the black lines with color, but I don't want all of them replaced. Maybe I want the bullets replaced as well. I just want these ones replaced. Remember, I can always augment the selection. I can add to it because I missed those little tips. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate that. And now I'm going to turn off the other one. Okay, so now I have a color hold that is actually pretty effective because it shows that this kind of impact around his head is different than everything that's outlined, heavy black. And then that makes me realize, you know where else I want something like that? I want it on the clouds of smoke. Like this. So I'm going to duplicate that out from my green olive layer. And on the shadow, underneath all these outlines, There's not that many of them, just between his foot and the cop car. And I'm going to duplicate that out of my green olive layer and then turn those off. And now play with those. So this one, I want this to be darker, right? So I'm going to rasterize the layer style and then play with adjustments. And I can play with levels, and I can make it a lot darker, right? And I can make it a lot less bright and give it just a little something, that's different than black. Then I can play with its color balance, its hue, saturation, its spectrum. Or I can simply start with this and then go to image adjustments and use one we haven't used before, which is invert, which will just give me its opposite. Right? Maybe that will get me closer to it. And then I just play with hue, saturation. And from there I can change it to any kind of spectral hue I want, any amount of intensity, and any amount of lightness or darkness. Same thing for these. So I'm going to first rasterize the layer style, and then I'm going to say image adjustment, invert, take it to its opposite, and then I'm going to play with hue saturation. And I don't want it to be as saturated, right? So I'm going to take that down, and I can play with its lightness or darkness, maybe lighten it up so it looks more like smoke, and play with its hue. I actually kind of liked it there, a little cyan. Yeah. So those are color holds. I'm going to take all of those, put them into a folder on top, and call it color holds. Anything that goes on top of your black line art, make it green. And I know I have green for soft edge too, but that's because you need lettuce in a sandwich. So I think you need lettuce and olives. And now you can kind of see how that is impacting the illustration, right? Now, just like with color holds, just like with full spectrum, I tend to overdo it when I first do it. So then I like to duplicate it, turn off the one behind, rasterize it, or merge it all into one, and then use eraser where I think it might be too strong, right? Or in this case, I'll just set it all to dissolve and then take its opacity down. So it will let the black come through a little bit like that, instead of being solid like that. So these are all these options you have for your coloring. And that also thins out my stars a little bit so they're not quite so clunky. All right. So now we've got our spot illustration with all those bells and whistles with the color holds. We've already added an offset to help it show up on dark backgrounds. So now we're ready to turn it in. And the one thing I'm questioning is these bullets. Yeah, no, I think that works. And then there's one thing, I missed that little lip of the color hold. So how do I fix that? I just need to know what layer it's on. Come on. Select Photoshop for me. I'm going to save because it's starting to glitch a little bit. So I go to my combined color holds. It's there. I'm going to use the clone stamp. I'm going to use it pretty small, pretty targeted here, because this is now going over the top of my line art. So everything's going to show. The reason you do so much of digital coloring underneath your line art is so that it always covers up your edges. So it kind of cleans it up. But color holds exist above those lines. Okay. So